2022 is almost here. And what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make it the best year of our lives? There's distractions everywhere. We found out in the last hour that Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty on everything. And that's exciting. It's so exciting. I might not go squat more today, or go for a walk, or eat a good meal, or build the next email or something else, because there's distractions everywhere. We're talking today with Mike Kimelman about how to get rid of those distractions and how to go build yourself into the best version of yourself you can be in 2022. Some of the traps that we use to avoid answering our call, and the relationship between one part of you and everything else, that it doesn't really matter if you get really strong or you can run a fast mile if you're not a good spouse. And it doesn't matter if your Bitcoin's doing great, but your heart health is horrible. And Mike here is going to go walk us through how all that connects. Mike Kimelman, welcome to Redbeard Live.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be here.
I'm excited to have you, in part because of your holistic view. And one of the stories I tell a lot about is sword fighting. Did sword fighting for a decade. And you show up on your first day of sword fighting and you say, I want to sword fight. And the group's like, oh, great, there's the pile of loner armor. So you go to the pile of loner armor and you spend way too long. Like, where does this part go? Trying to put pieces on you and sort of get it figured out. And then you eventually waddle over and you pick up a sword that doesn't fit you very well because it's not your sword. And then you start doing this thing. And then if you keep on showing up, eventually you start getting your own armor. Eventually you start getting your own sword. Eventually you stop being dumb. You'll learn how to breathe. Maybe you'll learn how to block. If you keep on showing up, enough years pass on. Now you're a solid sword fighter. And if you keep on showing up, eventually you become adept at various of these things. But there's all these parts. It doesn't matter how good your armor is if you can't breathe. It doesn't matter how good your breathing is if you can't block with your shield. It doesn't matter how good your shield is if whatever the first thing is that I said. It's all connected. And it's obvious to us when you look at one slice, like a single sport, a single hobby. But one of your messages in your coaching program, which is truealpha360.com, is that you can't just do one thing and then expect to have extraordinary results. And I think as we're looking at 2022, it's only 6 weeks away, folks. As we're looking at 2022, part of the question of, are we going to be the best we've ever been, is, are we going to put in that disciplined attention towards all the spaces that matter? And that's part of what you walk people through. Can you help us understand more about why that matters and the direction you take?
Sure. And great to be here. You hit a lot of the good aspects already in that opening statement. So I appreciate you telling the story. Repetition and deliberation, those are two big things. Being intentional. And like you said, you can choose in this life where you want to focus your time, and where you focus your time is where your energy goes. Now, what a lot of us don't do is focus it on the things we should be focusing on. Everybody puts job paramount, and that's okay. We got to earn our income. Money is important. People who tell you money is not important, clearly haven't lived life very long, or have a very limited view of life. But what we can do is be intentional about the other parts as well. So whether that's relational, whether it's, being a father or a mother to your children, whether it's going out and finding a significant other. I always hear people talk about, well, there's nobody good out there, or I can't find a mate or a spouse. And part of that reason is you haven't worked on yourself first. And the advice I always give people is you got to work on yourself, make yourself somebody that would be appealing to not only you, but to somebody else. And that's how you set it up and do it. You're muted, Brian. Yeah.
I am muted. I'm so excited I'm muted. I've been married 2 months as of today, and I've been looking for a wife for a long time, 15 years. And what I didn't understand, and I'm not sure I could have understood because, maturity and growth, is when I was first looking for a wife, maybe 21, the actual answer was not go find a wife. I thought that was the question. No, now I understand. The right question was, how can I become a man worthy of attracting the right woman?
Absolutely.
That's in all the literature, and it took me over a decade to get it figured out. And you know what? I finally got to the place where I attracted the right woman. But that idea that they're not the problem, I'm the problem, that's something that especially me in my 20s, now I'm sure I'm still suffering from that a little bit, but I'm less bad than I was at the ego of the world needs to change as opposed to I need to change.
And that's, you hit it on the head. Everybody looks and finds fault in others, or why they're not good enough, or why they're not right. and really look inward. You got to turn that focus internal and make yourself much more appealing. Make yourself, like you said, the type of man that would draw and attract somebody of your caliber to you. And I know you're a high caliber person. I've always known that. But sometimes it's a matter of dialing in yourself first before trying to broadcast that message out to others.
What's more important? Is it more important to clearly identify our faults, weaknesses, and frailties and resolve them? Or is it more important to find what we're good at and double down on it?
It's a great question.
This is a global and a micro question, because in business, should I get better at podcasting that I already do a bunch of, which I'm good at, or should I stop being quite so crappy at Canva and graphic design? Right. But it also applies to life in general, in every area of life.
See, I don't think there's a exact answer to that. And the advice I give and what I try to do with myself is, if you have a discernible skill or talent that's marketable, that puts you, it's a differentiator for you, you got to work on that and extract as much value out of that as you could. Become as good as whatever it is you're at that differentiates you. Because if you don't do that, somebody else is going to come along and replace you by developing that skill. And we live in a hyper specialized world these days, unfortunately. So I used to manage money, as you know. I ran a hedge fund. And back in the day, you could be a generalist. And I was a generalist, meaning I knew biotech, I knew a little bit of industrial materials, a little bit of technology, just enough skills to be able to rely on an analyst to basically take his opinion, develop it into an investable thesis, implement that, and put it to work. These days, I would be a dinosaur if I was still doing that, because there's so many people who know one area and know it better than anybody else, can draw on that talent of knowledge and that wealth of, connecting things that might not make sense or might not connect for somebody that doesn't have that specialization. So I think it's two-pronged. You have to develop the skills you have, make them the best you can, but you can't neglect everything else. You need a basic modicum of skill, because if you don't have that little level of skill, you're just going to get taken advantage of when you delegate. And I always tell people, obviously, delegate whatever you can. That's not something that differentiates you or makes you better than people. But if you're going to delegate marketing or sales or podcasting or whatever it is in your business, and you don't have that fundamental basic underpinning to it, you're ripe for being taken advantage of in that type of situation. So you do need a base level of skill, and then you really need to be intentional and sit quietly or get feedback and develop those attributes that differentiate you from the crowd.
So we come to the question of standards for ourselves and for others, for whatever we're delegating. What is good enough? I was just giving a talk on this at Icon, the Keep Convention, 2 weeks ago. What is good enough and what is not good enough? And that a lot of things are actually good enough, even though they're not great in various areas of life.
Yeah.
And ignoring that which is good enough but not great is important, because oftentimes we don't want to do hard work. So we focus on what is good enough already instead of what is not good. Greg Anderson once phrased it as, he sees a lot of guys with $10,000 gear and $10 fitness.
Yeah.
Because it's fun to buy more guns. It's not fun to do more push-ups. And we're all trying to escape discomfort all the time. So our standard's like, I'm going to do what's fun. When you look at 2022 and you think about your clients in True Alpha 360, and because I'm sure you have people there who you see them, and maybe you've seen yourself, you want to do what's fun. That constantly turning towards pain is horrible.
Well, that's why you don't do it constantly. You be deliberate about it again. And I like the deliberate discomfort approach. So, if you want to develop your mental toughness, and there's very few things that will lend more to making you a superior human being and more eminently qualified than deliberately doing hard things. I mean, it's a muscle like anything else, mental toughness. So if you're not cultivating it and developing it, you're letting it rust off. And in that case, that means it could be daily, but more likely it's pick a deliberate monthly trial. And I call them crucibles. So we do quarterly, we do monthly, we do mental crucibles, we do physical crucibles. And again, it doesn't have to be something outrageous. You don't have to climb Everest or although I do know people that did that 29 in Utah that basically mimics Everest. That was one of their crucibles, and a phenomenal one at that. But pick something hard that's going to test you. As you know, I went on an Outward Bound mission not that long ago. And I was sort of, I'll be honest, I was deceived by how difficult it would be. And had I known how difficult it would be, I might not have gone on it. But I'm glad I did, because right when it hit me and I saw I was going to be in 5 days with, hiking 5, 6, 7 miles a day with a 60-pound pack, and I had a herniated disc in my back at the time. So it wasn't like, hey, I showed up in A shape. I showed up knowing it would be tough, but had no idea it would be that tough. I mean, it was just 5 days of pain. But when I was done, you get that feeling, that elation of, hey, if you could survive that, there's not that much that could knock you out at this point. And you just keep building off that base, keep doing difficult things.
The vibe I got when I came back from Mount Rainier the first time was, and I couldn't walk for 2 weeks. I was very awkward in walking. It's not like I was completely incapacitated, but I was mildly crippled for 2 weeks because I was so not in shape. I thought I was in shape. Hilarious. I expected it to be the hardest thing in my life, and I was wrong. It was 2 to 3 times harder than that.
Yes.
And I just want to share a picture. This is not that climb. So this is me, and this is 2 years ago. So this is both a flex and also a confession. 2 years ago, this time of year, I was on Mount Rainier every week for 5 weeks. And one of those times I was doing cold weather training. It's about as cold as it looked. Billowing snow, ice biting your skin. And people just looked at me like, what in the world is wrong with this? Everyone's in their puffy jackets and their big hats and everything. And I was out there doing heavy breathing, Wim Hof stuff on my way up, imagining all the visualization, everything. It was fantastic. The confession part is I last did that 2 years ago. That I have this impression of me like, oh, this is who I am. Well, it's who I was to the extent that you are who you are, what you're doing. It's definitely who I was. I get to claim that, but it's not who I am. Who I am is I'm a desk jockey who has stories about mountain climbing. And in your coaching program, how do you help people who have done things, real things, but they're not doing them now? Because I notice in crafting my own narrative, I fall into the trap more than once. Like, I'm a sword fighter, I tell you. Well, no, I was last in armor 4 years ago. I sold my armor 4 years ago. And actually, the last 2 years or so, I wasn't crazy intense. That I really, 8 years is when I was really intense. So if you compare me at 10 years to another 10-year fighter who's a similar skill level in general, they would be dramatically better, because if their last years they pushed hard, they could have. And I knew guys who pushed hard, and we went from being peers to being, they were so much better because they pushed hard. And I put my feet on the brakes for those last 2 years. So yeah, I was in armor 10 years, but that was a while ago. So it's not even that I stopped fighting 4 years ago. I stopped fighting seriously 6 years ago. How do you help people who have this cognitive defect or bias or something where we over-identify with the best we've ever been and use that to distract ourselves from the reality of how long I could fight in armor today, which I bet is not long at all?
Right. It's not easy. I mean, it's about developing and crafting silence for yourself, just to be very frank, and to sit back and figure out, where am I going to focus my time and attention? What is my identity like today? Because as you mentioned, your identity today might not be the same identity you had several years ago. And that's fine. We're constantly evolving as human beings, as we should be. If we're not growing as humans, we're dying. It's inertia, it's physics, one way or another. So if you're not deliberately growing, you're dying when it comes to that. I think the easiest way is, first of all, get clear and dial in your purpose. We all talk about purpose and passion, and it's missing for most of us. I'll be very frank. It was missing for me for many years. Even though I was a financial success, I was a zombie going to work, downing 3-4 coffees, trading the same things every day, making phenomenal money, but sort of putting off my life until, hey, when I make X number, and the funny part of finance in New York is that X number always grows bigger. So it started out at 10, and then it became 50 million, and then 100 million, because you keep meeting people that have reached those goals, and they're not really goals. They're just arbitrary numbers. Your life at 100 million is really not different than your life at 50 million. I'll be very frank. But people use it as a way to keep score. So it's dialing in, what are you really passionate about as a person? What is your purpose? And most people think that just comes to you, and it really doesn't. For a few lucky ones, it may. My buddy, I've got probably 2 buddies in my entire orbit who were fortunate enough to find what their passion was as a child. One played professional baseball and the other's an actor, and they've done nothing but their entire life. And they're
Wow.
both brilliant at it, some of the best in the business. They love it. They never want to do anything else. And I'm definitely jealous of them, because as somebody
Awesome.
who's had, 8 careers and have been successful at all of them, though, it's not anything that's dialed in where I'm super passionate or that I super love. But what you can do is figure out what is important in your life. If that's your children, if that's a charity, if that's growing, and trying to evolve to a higher consciousness, whatever it is for you, whether it's getting in the best shape of your life, or, as I mentioned, learning and keep being curious about life. If you dial it in and actually commit to it and keep growing on that factor, then you have a shot at least of finding something that you're passionate about, or cultivating a passion in an area you might not have known about. So there's no answer there. And I think we beat ourselves up over it, just like we beat ourselves up over finding the spouse you mentioned earlier. It's all right to go through the 5 years, the 10 years of whatever you want to call it, sowing your oats, banging your head against the wall, meeting people who are not good fits. All of that is preparation for the journey. I think you really have to look at this journey as it happening for you, not to you. And it's a change of mind. It's a switch in that mental reference, where if you think life is hostile and just coming at you and battering you, it's going to keep doing that. You're constantly going to find ways to mentally affirm, hey, now I've got this happening, now this. And those people, we both do, who invite that drama into their life. And they always have this next level of, oh, now my issue is this, or here's my problem. But if you think of life happening for you, and then even when you're being tested or you're failing, that you're not actually failing, you're learning. It's John Maxwell has that great, I either win or I learn. He never loses. That's a phenomenal attitude to go into any of these situations with, because, hey, you may do 5, 6, 7 things. You may try 4 majors. They may all be completely inappropriate for you. But you've ruled some things out. You probably gathered a little bit of knowledge, and you've gotten some experience that's going to lend you in a future situation. So I think we all have to be a little bit lighter on ourselves, while still demanding accountability and a certain level of excellence, which we can program in too.
That's one of the very interesting things about coaching. I run my Redbird Accelerator weekly coaching call for entrepreneurs. And in this last week, man, we had 4 maybe of the people in the call were able to do one thing while they were on the call, where it was we talked about an idea and they said, that's a good idea. Okay. What's the absolute first thing? Like sending a single Facebook message, doing a single thing, not that you have to actually do the project, but just what's the first thing? And then they're able to go, as we're talking about the next person, go do the one thing and chat in. Okay. I sent the Facebook message. Just that momentum and that accountability of, okay, so it really is that easy. I want to talk about your 5 power pillars. And they're on your website here. We got truealpha360.com. We have professional, physical, mental, relational, and spiritual. And I think of all those, they're all clear how you define each of those. What I'm really curious about, I think, is this relational one. I think we probably talk about relational not enough. We pretend that there's plenty of us out there who pretend that professional success, if we define ourselves by professional success, that's okay. At least if you're a guy, that's okay. Plenty of us say, well, if you can bench a bunch, or you can squat or whatever, if you climb mountains or you're a sword fighter, that's enough because you're great at that one thing. Mental, plenty of us, including myself, maybe overpride ourselves on our intelligence. And we say, well, I'm smart, I'm well read, I can debate, I know I know the news, I know what's happening in the world, so I'm smart enough. And then spiritual, there's some people where their level of totally being at peace or connected or whatever, they say, okay, that's enough. But this relational thing, I want to talk about that. And when you look at the guys in your group and you look at 2022 and you look at what are some of the relational, either the blind spots you're helping some of your people get through, or you're looking at the kinds of challenges people are facing, that what does it look like when someone joins Alpha 360? And all those other 4 are more or less clear, but the relational one, and someone says, I'm here, what do I need to do? What's the accountability look like for relational?
Well, the first thing you have to do is look honestly at yourself and see where you're lacking. And very few of us do that as well. So if you're not married, maybe it's a partner you're wanting. If you have kids, look at the relationship you have with your children or your significant other. And then it's funny because you and I are both in some ways traditionalists. And I think we intrinsically understand Well, in many ways not being that way, because we're both sort of cutting edge technologists and whatnot. But
It's a funny world.
Evolutionary behavior and psychology and knowledge is a powerful thing. So I'm sure you heard from your parents or others, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that, frankly, in this world, networks, and we've talked about this in the past, and I know, you've had some tremendous people on the show have talked about it. Networks are replacing some of the basic knowledge that we have about things because the world is moving too quick to catch up. You used to be able to, drive a car. If your car broke down, you could fix it. Part of learning how to be a man, you learn how to change a tire, learn how to fix something else in the car. These days, if your car breaks down and you're not a computer scientist with the proper chips or whatnot, you can't fix anything. So we've removed so much of the agency from our day to day and this is the specialization aspect we talked about earlier. You could be a phenomenal mountaineer and have all the knowledge you need there. But if you're out camping with somebody and you need somebody who's a navigator or runs a map better, that's a weakness. And the only way to fill that is not necessarily by becoming the most advanced, navigator or the most advanced, car repairman or whatever it is. It's to surround yourself with a network, a tribe who can do these things for you and better yourself. So the relational part is developing and cultivating the right networks. And obviously it takes some work just to develop those networks as well as to understand what the right networks are. But that's a big one. Yeah.
On that, how do I assess if my networks are good or not? When I recall hearing, it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know back in college. And they gave us, workshops on networking. A bunch of teenagers and early 20s-year-old. I look back and say, there's no chance we'd have any idea.
Yep.
I'm in my late 30s and I finally sort of get it. And critically, I actually have value to bring. But back then, when they're teaching about networking in college, you don't have any value. Maybe you've read a book. No one cares. And it's even more so now where you have a global competition and there's really smart, really hungry people with great English skills working any hours, working for 10% of what you make will be a fortune to them. You want to pay a Filipino $10 an hour? That's like an American getting paid 80 or 100K.
Yep.
And they'll work at 2 a.m. gladly to be on your time schedule. So what do you even have as a kid? You have nothing. I now see that, of course, at the time. Who wants to hear that? But how do you, with your clients, with your members of your coaching, how do you help them assess? How do you give a letter grade? If we talked in private about my network, would you give me you're A on relational, or do you have a system where you say, okay, this part, okay, you're married, you got a wife, fantastic, but I see that your professional relationships are actually a C-. Let's fix that in 2022. How do you assess?
So you ask them, you just dial into them and say, what are you actually doing to improve your networks or to improve your professional relational networks? And you'll find that most people do nothing, which is a really easy baseline to beat. So most people will occasionally show up at an event. They'll go to a conference once in a while. They'll maybe email a few people for lunch. What if you took the time each day to pick 3 people in your network, or call it 3 plus 1. So 3 in your network, reattach some type of note, a video. You can do an audio. Like some people like that additional touch of humanity versus just a text or an email. What if you reached out to them every day, 3 people? At the end of the month, that's 100 new people you've reestablished. It makes it a lot easier when those people, you need to go back to them and ask them a favor, or you want to get some information from them if the first time you're talking to them isn't in 2 years when you hit them up. So by keeping those networks fresh and cultivating them and say, hey, are there other people you think I should be talking to about this subject or about this industry? Maybe you would like to see this. Provide value. I mean, people don't provide value to their networks, and then they wonder why their networks are stale. Keep providing value to your network. Be deliberate about growing it. So 3 already in your network, and then reach out to somebody new. The most amazing thing about the internet and where we are now is you actually can get access to people on Twitter. I know you've reached out. You're great at this. You've reached out to people on Twitter, and they'll respond to you. Everybody from like John Robert or whoever. I know you've developed and cultivated those relationships. That's available to almost anybody if they're actually trying to provide value, trying to be a person of interest, and taking deliberate steps to do it. It goes the same with LinkedIn or all these others. You have access to people now. And then the flip side of that is, and you mentioned as a 20-year-old, what could we possibly do back then? One thing you could do as a younger person, and I do get plenty of younger people. My clients split between what I call mid-age crisis and quarter-age crisis. So the mid-agers are like, me at 45, is that all there is? I'm successful financially, but I'm not really happy. I thought there was supposed to be more to this. What else can I do? And then the quarter ages are even more frustrated because they did all the things they were supposed to do. They ran the playbook to a T. They went to college, they got good grades, they've got now massive debt, they worked a shitty first job, and they're like, all right, is that all there is really? So that's a huge, breakdown in the two client scales. But be coachable. If you're a young person, be coachable and go find mentors. That was my biggest mistake growing up. I went from being an M&A lawyer for a big New York firm to basically teaching myself how to trade, how to become an analyst, how to then become a portfolio manager. And I did it the entire way pretty much by myself, which was a huge mistake. I probably could have time collapsed that 10 to 12 years into 5 years, maybe 6, if I had gotten proper mentorship. And I didn't, just because I thought I could do it on my own. I was a little bit stubborn. I was a little bit proud, didn't want to ask people. And frankly, I was a little bit lazy. Like, it's difficult to reach out to somebody and say, hey, can you help me? But
it's like you're talking about me.
Yeah. It's
in both my sword fighting career, my climbing career, my business career, my trombone career, probably my soccer career, everything. And it's that combination of, well, as Americans, we have the rugged individualist thing, right? Yeah. And then we have the ideal of masculinity as you're standing alone, you're Sisyphus, you can do everything on your own.
We're not asking for directions, but
yeah. Well, it's funny. So I'm actually the guy who always asks for directions because I'm really intolerant of wasting time.
Yes.
And so it's funny. Usually it's my partner or my wife who doesn't want to ask for directions. And like, come on, why waste 5 minutes here? Usually,
which is a better approach. Again, time is your most valuable commodity, so why waste it?
Yeah, So what does it look like when someone wins? Let's say someone shows up at your door in Alpha 360 and they have the other 4 power pillars. They're doing okay, and clearly relational is their weakest one. And they spend, well, first question is, how long does it take someone in your program to see some kind of results in the relational power pillar or them in general? And then what kind of results do they see after a year?
A year is a long time. So a year is more than enough time. If somebody comes to me with the goal of, hey, I'm going to fix my entire life, I'm going to be the most financially successful, relational, I'm going to find God, and I'm going to be improve my IQ 15 points. And they say, and I want it all by next week or next month, then you have a problem. Like anything else, you can't erase years of bad living, years of bad decisions in a month. But I do firmly believe in, whether it's I think Bill Gates originally said it, but I'm going to just start saying that Peter Thiel said it because I don't like Bill Gates, of what we can do in a year, we overestimate, but what we can do in 5 years, we certainly underestimate.
Oh, it's way older than that.
And a year is more than enough time for you to fix your life. In fact, if you're not seeing real results in 30, 60, 90 days, and it doesn't have to be fixed, because there is, again, no fixed. We operate from that growth mindset where you're just hitting a goal and then you're setting a new goal. You're putting a process in to keep getting bigger and better goals. So we're not just hitting a target and then, backing off and cruising. We keep going. And what you have to do then is, like I said, really have an analysis of where you're lacking, and then sit in silence and go through some of the exercise we do. We do deliberate exercises with passion, purpose, and principles, dialing those in. Things like a eulogy exercise, which I'm sure you've done before or have looked at, which is an end of life, really serious and powerful exercise. Because again, the map is important, because if you have no idea where you're going, you have no idea where you end up. You're just going to be all over the map. If you know where you want to be, and that where you want to be for a lot of people is the end of their life, what it would look like, whether that's kids and grandchildren and a happy marriage and being physically and financially comfortable. Those are all things that you can put in stone on paper and achieve. You just have to have a map for it.
I have a few approaches. I have the what impact is any decision, large or small, having on the great grandchildren that you'll never meet? That's one handy metric. Another one is just the 100-year metric. Right now, it's what will life look like in 2100. I
Yeah.
was discussing real estate investment this morning with my wife about what do we want reality to look like for our grandkids in 2100, and how does that relate to our investing strategy now in 2021. And then a third thing is I got to see three of my grandparents and know three of my four grandparents. And so like my grandpa Harold was at 95, he was still weightlifting. My entire life he's been weightlifting, and they were small weights. In his 90s though, right up until he had a stroke, he was on the floor with weights every day.
Phenomenal.
And so I think it's just incredible. The level of strength and commitment this guy has, just out of this world. And I think, okay, I know something about the impact of what seeing that had on me, seeing my entire life. What do I want to give to my grandkids? Do I want to give the same thing? Do I want to give something different? Is there something my grandpa gave me that I don't want to give, or that I am willing to sacrifice? A good thing I want to sacrifice, or a bad thing I don't want to have around? Right. And just really compare, what do I actually, and we don't kids, we just got married, but looking at, okay, for the grandkids, so thinking 2 generations down that don't even close to exist yet. And then, okay, well, what does that actually mean for how I should be living my life today, this week, this year, and what I think is important?
That's
myself.
I like the long-term approach. And I think it's funny that you had the blessing to have a model like that. And as somebody who's not yet a parent, but I am a parent with 3, what you'll find is kids, they listen to you, but they watch you more than anything else. So if you can model the behavior you want to see in your children, if you can model the behavior, your spouse wants to see, that's all there is to it, because they pick that up, and they pick it up quickly, and they may not articulate it right away. And it takes years sometimes to see it, but in the long game, that's what they learn. And the flip side of that, though, is, I know you talked about a 100-year plan, is most people don't do the things they need to do, or stretch themselves how they should stretch, for one reason: fear. Yeah.
Today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today. I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I want to go hiking today, Mike. I want to watch Netflix. I deserve, it's Friday. I deserve pizza.
Absolutely.
I deserve a beer. It's Friday, man. I worked hard this week. Okay. I deserve a break.
Absolutely. There's endless rationalizations you can use.
Ooh,
but I
R-word.
think, right. But the sadder part is when they see somebody in a room that they want to go up and say hi to, an attractive female or a potential business partner, and they talk themselves out of that because of that fear or possible social discomfort. And you talked about a 100-year plan. My 100-year plan is different. My 100-year plan is when I'm judging whether to do something. And again, I have a daughter who's very anxious socially, so everything I do drives her crazy. But when I'm looking at whether to do something or not, I think in 100 years, will this matter? And the odds are 0 chance. And then it's not only 100 years, you could do 10, 10, 10, 10. In 10 minutes, will it matter? 10 weeks, 10 months, 10 years. Will any of that matter if I get, stood up on when I ask a girl out, if I sort of don't get that, promotion when I ask my boss? And so looking 100 years from now, nobody knows anybody if you weren't a president or broke some sports record or something else. So in the end, it's not going to make a difference really anyway. You're here for a limited period of time. Might as well give it your all and leave it all out on the playing field. So that's one approach.
I love it, Mike. Would you tell us what the onboarding process is like? Because you work really carefully and closely with people and you have a community, I assume it's not just hand you some cash, then you fix me.
Yep.
What does that vetting process look like? What is all that over at your website?
Yeah, so it's a couple things. One, it's a work in progress. So what I've done in the past is I consult and coach what I call high achieving individuals. So they're usually executives or hedge funds that I consult for. Those numbers that they pay are very high, probably more than most people can afford. What I wanted to do was offer a program where I take a lot of those best principles, best practices, work those processes and knowledge into more of a live group coaching that we could do every week for an hour, along with a group that's on Telegram where we have follow-up questions, follow-up, discussions, drop information, access to certain financial opportunities, that type of thing. So In order to do that, you have to change it, because one-on-one is very easy. And to adapt it to a group, it's a little more difficult, but it's doable. So what we do is broader programs. We try to do, as I mentioned, we call them the 5 pillars. There's also, it's the 5 mountains, we call it, where you're going to put together an actual battle plan. And that battle plan is going to say where you are now, where we need to go, and how do we get there. And it tracks for each of them, for professional, for the, for the relational, for the mental and the physical. And then what we really try to do in the beginning is, as I mentioned, we dial in your principles, your purpose, your passions, because that's going to basically give us the direction where you're heading. And then we also want to dial in, what's going to move the needle for you, and how are we going to move that needle? And those practices then we put into a whole battle plan, how to tackle it. And it's primarily motivated in the beginning by what I call the DSE Pareto rule. And DSE is just diet, sleep, exercise. Pareto, as you know, Pareto principle, an Italian economist, 80% of your results come from 20% of the things you do. It could be 80% of your sales come from 20% of your clients. It means you can basically look at certain things, and if we hit those 3 things, diet, sleep, and exercise, everything else will be better and take care of itself. And they also are very synergistic. If you're exercising, you're probably going to sleep better. And if you're sleeping better, you're probably not going to want to crave those crappy empty calories. So they all fit together. If you want to be a human being who's achieving literally on all of your priorities and all of your goals, and doing it in a way that's years and decades above your peers, you got to dial that in. Nobody else can do it if you don't have those 3 hit right.
What about when we backslide? There's been times in my life where I was literally climbing mountains, also being a hero on the sword fighting field, also landing big clients and doing big projects. But inevitably, if I was doing all those things, then I was eating like crap, or my relationship at the time sucked, or I wasn't making time to for spiritual practice or something. When guys come to you and they're like, and they get some initial success, woo, hero.
Yeah.
And then something else falls apart. Like, okay, I'm sleeping fantastically, but crap, my clients are angry at me now because I wasn't at work often enough. Or I slept really good and I made great progress at work, but I skipped date night this weekend and my wife hates me. How do you help people balance as they're trying to go and push in every direction all at the same time?
Yeah, excellent question. It's the same approach that I've used for years. And essentially, it starts with a morning routine that's years and above your peers. And that morning routine sort of mimics with a mirror in the evening, where you will review what you've done for that day and plan out the next day. But the morning routine starts with, obviously, waking up. The earlier, the better. And depending on where you live and how you live, I'm not going to set a time or anything else, but figure out what works for you. It's becoming, first words to me are important. So the first words you speak upon waking have impact. So frame your day right, whether it's a mantra, whether it's showing some gratitude for being alive and another day to fight the good fight and get out there and achieve, then start there. It's not diving into your phone like we all love to do these days. Put it on hold for at least a half hour or longer. And then it's having some type of morning routine where you get your heart moving, and that could be, depending if you're an early gym person or not, at least do some stretching, do a little bit of cardio, do something to get your heart moving, do something to sit quietly. That's whether it's prayer or meditation or whatever. That's how you can focus on your day and really draw the power and the focus necessary to achieve your goals. And the best part is you're not then scrambling to write down, hey, what am I going to do today? You already did that the night before. That's the evening routine, where you're putting on paper, tomorrow, here's what I'm going to tackle and here's how I'm going to tackle it. So then when you've got your heart moving, when you've done your meditation, when you've had your morning coffee and some other things, then you're just right out into it. And then deliberately create that environment of excellence, which you mentioned earlier about removing distractions. So have some time to do deep work, whether it's, some people do deliberate breaking the day into quarters, others just chunk it. however you do it, have some time where you're just working and creating and doing your best work, where you don't have your phone near you, where you're not taking phone calls. I usually try to do that from about 9 to 12. It's just work time. I'm not scheduling conference calls. I'm not doing anything. It's right after my morning routine when I'm dialed in the most, when I've got the most focus and energy. And then I'll schedule my conference calls from 1 to 4. And then, again, how do you balance it all? Then I chunk time with my children because I know I'm picking them up from school or we're doing stuff. So from 4 to 8, and I'm not saying I don't have my phone and I'm not going to respond to an email here and there, but I'm not doing a 2-hour conference call. I'm not doing a bunch of other stuff if I'm supposed to be eating dinner with my kids or going over their homework or doing whatever it is with them. So I chunk that time. That's my time with them. I'll do the same with my significant other. You mentioned date night. Oh, we forgot about it this week. Don't forget about it. Put it on a calendar. If I had a conference call with you, I had this live stream today. There was no chance I was going to forget about it because I have it in my calendar. I've got alerts. So
I got to interview Corey Snyder on my podcast, a friend of mine, and he's been married for 15, 16 years now. They have 6 kids. Mm-hmm. And even before they got married, they were doing date night, and and that interview, plus a bunch of other folks I've interviewed for the podcast too, really focus on that being the foundational part of being successful in business is date night, as it happens. People keep on saying this. And so I've been married 2 months. We now have rock solid. We know when, unless we're not in town, this is just what's going to happen, period.
Good.
And that level of focus. And then one other thing I was going to say is that for me, I have a bit of a daily rhythm, but so no calls before 9 a.m., for example. But then I do a daily rhythm of days in the week. So Monday is either I'm recording for the podcast or I'm writing, and it alternates. So I almost never do meetings then. So often I have a Monday where at least half the day there's no meetings. It's okay. What has to be written? And then Tuesdays, I'm in calls all day. And sometimes Tuesday is really long. But then Wednesday, that's my day to get outside and go snowshoeing or take some extra meetings if it's a really busy week. Thursday, back to calls. And then Friday, nothing except for live streams.
Yep.
So some Fridays, I have 3 live streams in a row or more or less in a row. It's utterly exhausting. But I know today I'm doing 1 live stream. This is what I'm doing. I can give all my energy right here. It's the only thing live I'm doing today. Fantastic. And so I know I get a chance to rest, finish up work from the week, prepare for next week, do everything I need to do to avoid working on the weekend, make sure all that gets done. And so by having the daily rhythm within each day, plus the daily rhythm within the week, I end up with a situation where often I don't have to bleed over into the evenings or the weekends, and date night always happens.
Yeah.
So for folks who want this deliberately created environment of excellence, they're going to go. We got truealpha360.com. And then when you read through that, you see testimonials, you see all the details there, videos about your story, about what people are getting right there. And then if people want to follow you on Twitter, Mike Kimelman is your Twitter name. Folks have known Mike for a while now, a year or two, something like that. Mm-hmm. And if this idea of a deliberately created environment of excellence, if you feel like you're not sure if you have that, then I encourage you to go ahead over to Mike's site and take a look. Because if you don't have that, then you're probably missing out. And your 2022 is going to be different than your 2021 in significant part about your ability to create this thing that you're talking about, Mike. That if you don't create this environment, you always live in an environment. Either you created it and you created it to foster your excellence, or you accidentally created it and good luck that's going to make you excellent, or you're living in someone else's environment who created it for you and they probably created it to get you to buy something. Like if your lifestyle is Netflix, you are the product. Yes. And that's not so good. So I love this phrase you had.
Thank you. Yeah.
Love it.
It's when it comes to especially dialing the diet and that type of stuff, the environment of excellence is critical because it's easy, obviously, to slip if you've got junk food in the house, if you've got garbage all around. If you don't want to watch TV, don't have the remote right on the couch when you get there. Put it away somewhere. So you got to take that extra step. Take a battery out of it if you want to do that. And it's the same with your phone. Put it on do not disturb. If you're with your children or you're on your date night, don't put it out on the table right in front of you. And you could use it to an advantage other ways. I mean, you've got a screen there, have your goals, your process, your vision right on that home screen so that's the first thing that hits you, or have your children, which many people do, or your wife or whatever you're passionate about. But Use it as a tool. Don't let it use you as a tool.
Here's how serious I am about changing my environment. I'm considering getting a lock from my office door just so I can lock in my laptop and my phone into my office. Lock it, put the key somewhere on the other side of the house.
Yes.
I can still get in here. It's no problem. It's just that the interrupt of is this actually a time where this is where being connected is the most important, which means more important than lifting, eating, building, wife, whatever. Because that kind of environment design, like I'm not serious enough as I look at, okay, if I put a lock on my door, well, how fewer times would I be on technology after my workday is done when I'm not actually getting a really high ROI? Oh, interesting. So I love everything about that.
It's the same way for, and we didn't talk much about the financial stuff, which I do heavily in the class, but
yeah,
knowing my base instincts, I'm a trader at heart, and knowing something like Bitcoin, which I came across in 2014, 2015, and didn't want to sell it after I bought it. And knowing that I can't stop watching charts and doing that stuff, I purposely took the place I stored my Bitcoin and put it out of reach. So not in my house, somewhere else. So if I actually even wanted to sell it, I had to take numerous steps to go acquire that property just to be able to sell it. And it served me well because it's, I knew it would go higher. It certainly has gone a lot higher. And I removed that temptation to, on a day where it would be up, saying, all right, I got to sell it. So, know yourself.
Just putting one last banner up here. That's apparently the point of this live stream.
Yes.
Is if you're to the extent to which you're able to do this in 2022 determines if you win. Mike, thanks for being on the show. Here's the place to go, folks, to go and listen, get details on Mike's coaching.